All right, now that we have looked at what we mean by inflation, this general increase in price levels, how do we determine what inflation is and how do we measure inflation? So to measure inflation in the United States, we use what we call the Consumer Price Index. And there are multiple measures of inflation. There's the GDP deflator and other indicators that the Federal Reserve uses. But we're going to focus on the Consumer Price Index, probably the most popular, the most commonly reported measure of inflation. And what this does is it measures the typical consumer's cost of living. And so when we're thinking about typical consumers' cost of living, again, we're going to look at the basket of goods that an individual household purchases throughout the year. And typical consumer, we're thinking an urban consumer, what they purchase and all of the different goods and services from housing to food to every single item within that basket. And what Consumer Price Index is used, as an information tool for the general population so that we all know more about inflation, but it's also used in cost of living adjustments or COLAs. So what do we mean by these cost of living adjustments? Unions and individuals with contracts, Social Security recipients all have COLA ties to their income. And so, or typically do, have COLA ties to their income. And what that means is that they arrange for a set contract, let's say for maybe 5 years, and then they say with COLA adjustments. And what this means is each year their wage is automatically increased based on the inflation rate. So let's say the inflation rate is 2%, the wages of these individuals who have COLA ties will increase automatically by 2%. And so it's maintaining the cost of living is what they're referring to. And so that's why we're called COLAs or cost of living adjustments. The Consumer Price Index is computed through or by the Bureau of Labor Statistics under the US government. And so government agency, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS, are the ones that compute this, similar to the BLS computed the unemployment rate. So if you want to find out more information about the current Consumer Price Index, definitely go see the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, and you'll find more about how it's calculated and also what the current CPI numbers look like. All right, so how is CPI calculated? And we're going to go through the whole process of the actual calculations that are done by the BLS. So the first thing that's done is a basket is fixed. And what do we mean by that? We mean that we're looking at what is that typical American consumer purchase throughout the year. So they fix the basket and they say the average consumer or the average consumer household purchases X units of housing. They purchase this many pounds of bananas each year. The average household purchases one prom dress. And so all of those different items that we think about going into our budget on a yearly basis goes into that basket. And so after we fix the basket and we know, okay, this is what's in the typical consumer's basket, the people and the individuals who work for the BLS go out and they collect the prices of all the different items in these baskets. So they find out what is the price of bananas, what is the price of the prom dress, what is the price of gasoline, all of the different items that fall into the basket. They go out and collect information on the price of those goods. Then they compute the basket's cost. So based on the X pounds of bananas that the average household, the typical household's purchases, they find the price and they multiply those two together to get the basket's cost. So they're adding up the cost of everything in the basket together to get that total basket's cost. Now they're going to then compare the base year the cost of the basket in today's terms to the cost of a basket in a given base year. So I always have to give you the base year, but this is going to allow us to compute a consumer price index. And the important thing to note here is that we do have an index. This number isn't going to be a percentage. It's not going to be a dollar amount. The dollar amounts are the cost of the basket in the current year divided by the cost of the basket in the base year. What this then gives us is an index number, so a number that's going to be relative to something like 100. All right, and so after we compute CPIs for all of our given year, so each year has its own CPI, and we're comparing it to a base year, then we can compute the inflation rate. And the inflation rate is the percent change in CPI. So we look at CPI this year, subtract out CPI last year, divide by CPI last year, and multiply by that 100%. That's going to give us our inflation rate. So this is how the BLS is collecting data and calculating the consumer price index measure of inflation. So first going out, finding what the typical consumer purchases, then finding the prices of those goods and computing the basket's cost. Next, from the given base year, we compute the CPI, and then finally, after we have CPIs for a variety of years, then we can start to compute the inflation rate and see how has the price or the cost of living changed over time. All right, so let's look at an example. So let's work through all 5 of these steps. So number 1, fix the basket. And we're going to, in our examples, be very simple and say that the typical consumer purchases 2 goods, 4 pizzas, 10 lattes, just to keep things simple. Okay, so then our BLS has to go out and they have to collect information on the price of pizza and lattes. So they find the price of pizzas and lattes for 3 years, 2015 to 2017. All right, then step 3, calculate the cost of the basket. And so the cost of the basket, well, in each year we're purchasing 4 pizzas, and in each year we're purchasing 10 lattes. So in 2015, we buy 4 pizzas at $10 a piece, so 4 times the 10 is $40, and then we purchase 10 lattes at $2 a piece, that's $20, and so when we add that 40 and 20 together, we get 60. All right, and then in 2016, we purchased 4 pizzas at $11, so $44, and then 10 pizzas at $2.50, so $25 to get us to $69. And then finally, the 4 pizzas times the $12 a pizza in 2017, $10 times the $3 in lattes, and we can see the cost of the basket in 2017 was $78. Okay, so as we can see, we can tell that inflation is occurring because in all of these years, we have this general increase in prices. There's an increase in the price of pizza, there's an increase in the price of lattes. All right, and then we can see how the cost of the basket has also increased over time. So all of the goods and services that we're purchasing are going up in price. All right, so now that we have the cost of the basket, we can compute the CPI in each year. And again, whenever I tell you to compute CPI, we'll have to give you a base year. So we're going to use 60 as the base year. And then remember, we're comparing the CPI this year to the CPI in the base year. So in 2015, when I compute the CPI, I have 60, which is the cost of the basket in the current year, divided by the cost of the basket in the base year. And then we multiply that by 100. And so the CPI in 2015 is 100. And actually what you'll find is the CPI in the base year will always be 100. And that's because the cost of the basket is the cost of the basket in the base year. So CPI in the base year will always be 100. All right, now how does that change as we move to 2016? So in 2016, the cost of the basket was $69. We take that $69 and divide it by the cost of the basket in the base year, so $60. And we multiply that by 100 to get 115. And then in 2017, the cost of the basket was $78. We divide that by $60, which is the cost of the basket in 2015. Multiplying that by 100, we get 130. All right, so now let's calculate inflation rates. So to calculate the inflation rate, we need to take CPI this year, subtract out CPI last year, and divide it by CPI last year. Multiply it by 100 to get into percent form, and our inflation rate will be a percent. So whereas CPI was an index, now we have an inflation rate. How much or how has the value of money changed over time? And so what we're looking at here then when we compare 2016 to 2015, so the cost of the CPI this year was 115. Subtract out the CPI last year, divide it by CPI last year. So we have that 115 minus 100 divided by then 100. Multiply that by 100% to get it into a percentage form, and we see 15%. All right, and then now let's look in 2017. So the CPI in 2017 was 130. We subtract out 115 and then divide that by 115, and the inflation rate is 13% in 2017. Okay, so now that we've gone through this example, we'll go through another example in our next lecture. So if you have any questions on this, make sure that you, or if you're just not sure if you really understand the concept, definitely make sure you look at the next lecture and then also go through the example worksheet and practice problems before you take that quiz to make sure you fully understand this material.